get to Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. Never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time.
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough?
Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly launch a bold and unfiltered takedown of Tim Walz that leaves the Minnesota governor politically shaken, combining Greg's signature sarcasm with Megyn's sharp and focused critique. They lay bare the disorder, confusion, and embarrassing moments surrounding Walz's leadership, targeting everything from failed policies to press conferences that were more show than substance. Nothing escapes their harsh review. This isn't just criticism. It's a complete destruction of incompetence, wrapped in clever and biting humor. If Walz had any plans for a comeback, this powerful takedown just wiped them out completely.
A threat. You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was a teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't, actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service personnel. You must clarify, as your campaign had tried to do, and now you appear to be distancing yourself from that clarification.
Greg Gutfeld was already smiling before he even spoke a word, and that usually meant someone was about to be taken down hard. This time, the unfortunate target in Greg's ruthless game of sarcasm and political destruction was none other than Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz, a man so dedicated to being average, he could make plain beige wallpaper seem exciting.
Here's, two pieces of this that are really... I speak like they do. People are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves. And I speak especially passionately about, and then he goes on to blame it on the school shootings. I guess he was upset about school shootings, so he lied. But stop saying you speak like we do. I speak like regular people. What kind of bullshit is that?
Greg leaned back like a man getting ready for a feast of political nonsense and reached for his favorite tool, sarcasm. Walz wasn't just a political figure, Greg said with a smirk. He was a full-time bureaucrat, a part-time logic escape, artist, and a rising expert in public confusion. The kind of leader whose idea of strength was putting out a press release, canceling it, and then blaming the media for actually reading it.
Walz also seemed to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's a core we saw just recently done in Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote?
Greg didn't need a crystal ball to guess Tim's next move. All it took was a basic sense of how to avoid responsibility while smiling like you're fixing global hunger. If political cowardice had a spokesperson, Walz would be right in front,
and the
holding a
relationship
gift bag
between a
and
father
asking
and
for
son
a
in that
raise.
moment was overwhelming too. Yes, even among Republicans. But he wants to dodge the responsibility for his lies, and he brings up his son to do it. He tries.
Greg's mind kept replaying the greatest hits of Tim's blunders. Like the time he tried to explain his economic plan but somehow ended up outlining the plot of a low-budget disaster movie. Inflation? Not his fault? Job losses? Just one of Life's mysteries. Small businesses shutting down faster than Halloween pop-up stores in November? Pure coincidence.
I love this. The Tampon King gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramp.
And Tim Walz really did indeed look like the bumbling knucklehead he said he was.
Greg laughed. Watching Walz handle crises was like watching someone try to juggle chainsaws while blindfolded in a wind tunnel, except the chainsaws were on fire and the wind tunnel was his own administration. The man turned chaos into an art form. If government dysfunction had a Spotify playlist, Walz's speeches would be the top tracks. And don't even get Greg started on the lockdown flip-flops. 1 week it was all about science. The next week it was driven by feelings. Then a new surge would hit, and suddenly Tim would appear on camera with that same expression, like someone who just walked into the wrong wedding but still decided to give a speech. Greg couldn't help but be amazed by how committed Tim was to saying a whole lot without actually saying anything. Every press conference felt like a performance in avoiding real questions while answering ones nobody asked. He didn't pivot. He pirouetted with the grace of a moose on roller skates.
You're exactly right in the dynamic, and you could tell Walz was unsteady on his feet.
Greg was convinced Walz's campaign speeches were written by a motivational cat calendar,
they kicked
all
off
fluff,
the debate by
no
going
substance, just feel good.
Him, and
nonsense
was,
that sounded deep until you realized you were clapping for a guy who blamed potholes on climate change and grocery prices on vibes.
Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? And here's Tim Walz.
Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is.
Greg figured that if Walz ever wrote a memoir, it would be called Leadership in Reverse: How to Walk Back Every Decision Without Looking Like You're Running. Each chapter would be a guide to public avoidance, ending with a heartfelt apology, directed at no one in particular. But the real punchline, Greg noted, was how Tim Walz kept getting re-elected. He chalked it up to Minnesotans being either extremely forgiving or just too polite to admit they accidentally voted for someone whose leadership style resembled a substitute teacher who forgot the lesson plan. Greg wasn't alone in this roast either. Enter Megyn Kelly, who jumped into the takedown with the calm precision of a surgeon holding a verbal scalpel. She didn't just criticize Walz, she broke him down piece by piece, politically of course. Megyn had a different approach. While Greg was the Joker with a flamethrower, she was the prosecutor calmly laying out a case so solid it made Tim look like a guilty contestant on a rigged game show. She wasn't here to entertain, she was here to make it clear that Governor Walz's resume was less impressive than a napkin sketch drawn during a panic attack. Naturally, she began with education. Megyn pointed out that despite Walz once being a teacher himself, he had somehow ended up running one of the most chaotic school systems in the country. Schools opening and closing without warning. Curriculums constantly shifting and parents growing more frustrated by the day. It felt like his education policy came from throwing darts at a chalkboard covered in terrible ideas.
I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance. It's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs R Us. He wants to execute more DEI policies, and Trump wants to execute murderous gang members. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. When parents had the nerve to ask for clarity, they were met with lectures instead. Walz treated parental concerns like a contagious virus: contain it, downplay it, and blame it on misinformation. Megyn raised an eyebrow and quipped, "If parental engagement is dangerous, then Tim must think bedtime stories are acts of rebellion." Then came the riots. The time leadership was most needed, and Tim Walz decided to audition for the role of the Invisible Man. Megyn pointed out that his idea of crisis management during the chaos in Minneapolis was to stand behind a podium, say something half understandable, and then disappear like a magician who skipped reading the manual. She highlighted how the National Guard wasn't late because they moved slowly. They were late because the governor was too busy adjusting his political image. Heaven forbid he take real action before checking which way Twitter was blowing. Megyn shook her head and said it wasn't just buildings burning that night. It was credibility. Walz had a real talent, she added, for making himself look like the calm in the storm while quietly being the guy who forgot to board up the windows. His passive leadership was so skillfully done, it deserved a spot in a museum beside a sign that read, "Warning, may cause confusion and economic decay." Then she turned to his COVID record, not just the restrictions themselves, but the mixed signals, the random exceptions, and the way rules were enforced when convenient. Megyn joked that under Walz's guidance, a barbershop was a health hazard. But a packed political rally was just democracy in action. If logic were currency, his administration would be flat broke.
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our.
She made it crystal clear. Tim Walz didn't lead, he performed. He issued mandates like a game show host spinning a prize wheel, hoping whatever rule it landed on would be popular enough to go viral. But leadership isn't about chasing trends. It's about making decisions. And Tim treated decisions like hot potatoes, tossing them around, blaming the heat, and hoping someone else would catch them. Megyn wasn't finished. She turned to the economy, pointing out how small businesses across Minnesota struggled under Walz's selective shutdowns while big box stores kept thriving. It was a rigged game, and Walz was the dealer pretending he hadn't stacked the deck. Greg jumped back in to tag team the takedown, shifting the spotlight to Walz's obsession with appearances. The governor seemed to believe that if he smiled wide enough, no one would notice the mess of failed policies behind him. According to Greg, Walz's social media team worked harder than his actual policy team. Every tweet was carefully worded, every press photo perfectly framed, as if Minnesota's problems could be fixed with filters and hashtags.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face. You know? He forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrified Politico lingers on candidates' fingers and defend Walz's wide eyes as they claim beards are for bad guys?
Greg joked that Walz probably had a war room where his team spent hours debating the perfect camera angle for his next announcement, only to forget what the announcement was even about. It was performance over policy, showmanship over substance, leadership built on illusion. Greg said that if Walz had been the captain of the Titanic, he would have held a press conference to discuss the iceberg's tone, while the ship sank behind him, and he tweeted about hope, unity, and ice diversity. Megyn, with her usual calm force, stepped in for the final strike. She pointed out that Tim Walz had perfected the art of being accountable without facing any real consequences. Trust wore thin, yet Walz kept talking, spinning, and performing. Because in the end, Megyn said, Tim Walz isn't a leader, he's a placeholder. A man who fills space, makes noise, and hopes the applause drowns out the wreckage. A governor who rules with smoke, mirrors, and just enough charm to keep people distracted. And Greg, never one to go out quietly, added that as long as Walz kept pretending to lead, they'd keep the spotlight on him, because comedy doesn't write itself. But with Tim Walz in office, it might as well.
But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter.
4 fundamentals and 2 confusing, saying Israel when you meant Iran. Not ideal. May I remind you of Donald Trump's first tweet when she chose him. Thank you. That was just... I mean, he did seem unsteady. And that's the thing, because one of the goals when you get out there, Camille, is to try to project, don't worry, if anything happens at the top, I can do this job. And at no point last night did Tim Walz.
And just like that, the roast kept sizzling, because with Tim Walz still at the wheel, the material was far from drying up. Greg couldn't resist going in again. He leaned forward like a cat spotting a slow-moving laser dot and locked onto Walz's latest idea, his climate agenda. Now, Greg admitted caring for the environment is a worthy goal. But in Walz's hands, it looked more like a Pinterest board than actual policy. Solar panels stuck on crumbling school rooftops, electric buses that broke down more often than his talking points, and bike lanes running through neighborhoods where nobody even rides bikes. Greg joked that Walz seemed to be turning Minnesota into a Scandinavian dreamland, just without the working government or reliable transit. And then came the cherry on top, the brilliant idea to fight emissions by encouraging people to mow their lawns less. Yes, the lawn revolution. Greg laughed so hard he nearly tipped his chair. Somewhere in a policy bunker, a team of clipboard warriors must have decided that skipping yard work was the key to saving the planet. Meanwhile,
And the idea that you said that you were in war. Did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English, she told me my grammar's not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took chutzpah.